Thomas wiped down the marble floors of the Grand Riverside Hotel, his mop moving in steady, practiced strokes. At 58, he'd been working as the head janitor here for 12 years, so long enough to know every corner of this building, every stain that wouldn't quite come out, every secret the walls had witnessed. Tonight was different, though. Tonight was the annual Sterling Foundation Gala, the biggest event of the year. Men in tuxedos and women in glittering gowns would fill the ballroom upstairs, raising money for children's hospitals. Thomas had worked every one of these galas, always in the background, always invisible. He didn't mind. Invisibility had its advantages. It gave him time to think, to remember, to carry the weight of his own story without anyone asking questions he wasn't ready to answer. "Dad, you're going to be late if you don't leave soon." Thomas turned to see his daughter, Emma, standing in the doorway. 24 years old, beautiful and strong, with her mother's gentle smile. She worked in the hotel's accounting department now, something that filled Thomas with quiet pride every single day. "I've got another hour, sweetheart," he said softly. "Mr. Patterson wants everything perfect before the guests arrive." Emma walked over and kissed his cheek. "It's always perfect, Dad. That's why they keep you around." She paused, studying his face. "You okay? You've seemed distant lately." Thomas managed a smile. "Just tired. Getting older, that's all." She didn't look convinced, but she let it go. "Well, don't work too hard. I'll see you at home." After she left, Thomas returned to his work, but his mind was elsewhere. Somewhere in the past, in a different ballroom, at a different gala, when he'd worn a tuxedo instead of a janitor's uniform. That was another lifetime ago. Before the mistakes, before the fall, before he'd learned what truly mattered. The evening progressed. Thomas moved through the building's lower levels, emptying trash, checking supply closets, making sure everything was ready for the overnight shift. Upstairs, he could hear music beginning and the soft strains of a string quartet warming up. He shouldn't have gone upstairs. It wasn't part of his duties tonight. But something pulled him there anyway, some magnetic force he couldn't quite name. Thomas stood in the service corridor, looking through the small window into the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across hundreds of elegantly dressed guests. Waiters moved gracefully between tables. Everything was beauty and wealth and celebration. And then he saw her. A young woman stood near the edge of the dance floor, perhaps 26 or 27, wearing a deep blue gown that shimmered under the lights. Her hand rested lightly on a white cane, and she held her head high with a dignity that took Thomas's breath away. Even from a distance, even after so many years, he knew who she was. "That's Mr. Sterling's daughter," a voice said beside him. Thomas turned to see Maria, one of the veteran housekeepers. "Victoria. She's blind, you know. Has been since she was a teenager. Some kind of genetic condition. So sad. She used to love dancing." Thomas's throat tightened. "She's here alone?" "Her father's been called a wire, some urgent business call. She insisted on staying. Proud girl. Won't let anyone treat her like she's fragile." Maria sighed. "But I see her standing there, and my heart breaks a little. Everyone else is dancing, and she's just waiting." Maria moved on, but Thomas stayed frozen, watching Victoria. He saw the way she tilted her head, listening to the music, the slight sway of her shoulders, as if her body remembered what her eyes could no longer see. The brave smile she maintained even though she stood alone. He shouldn't do this. He was a janitor. She was Sterling's daughter. There were boundaries, rules, propriety. But Thomas had learned something in his years of struggle and rebuilding. He'd learned that kindness mattered more than propriety, that human connection mattered more than social convention, that sometimes the right thing to do was also the hardest thing to do. He made a decision. Thomas went to the staff bathroom and changed into the spare dress shirt he kept in his locker. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and pressed. He combed his grey hair, washed his hands twice, and took a deep breath. Then he walked into the ballroom. He moved carefully around the edge of the dance floor, his heart pounding. Up close, Victoria was even more striking, and not just beautiful, but radiant with an inner light that had nothing to do with her appearance. "Excuse me," Thomas said softly, his voice gentle. "I was wondering if you might do me the honor of this dance." Victoria turned toward his voice, her expression startled but not unwelcoming. I don't know you, do I?" "Your voice isn't familiar." "No. We haven't met." "My name is Thomas." He paused, then added with complete honesty, "I work here at the hotel. I saw you standing alone, and I thought, well, I thought perhaps you might enjoy a dance." He waited, giving her time, giving her control. This was her choice, completely. A slow smile crossed Victoria's face. "That's very kind of you, Thomas. Most people assume I can't dance because I can't see. They're wrong. She extended her hand. I'd love to. Thomas took her hand carefully, leading her to the dance floor. The quartet was playing something slow and gentle, a waltz from another era. He placed his hand lightly on her waist, held her other hand in his, and began to move. You'll have to guide me, Victoria said softly. But I promise not to step on your feet too badly. I think we'll manage just fine, Thomas replied, and they began to dance. At first, they moved carefully, finding their rhythm. But Victoria was an excellent dancer, responsive to every subtle pressure of his hand, every shift in his movement. She trusted him completely, and Thomas found himself guarding that trust like a sacred thing. Tell me about yourself, Thomas, Victoria said as they turned. What brings a hotel employee to dance with the boss's daughter? Thomas considered his answer carefully. I suppose I saw someone who wanted to dance, and I remembered what it feels like to be on the outside looking in. To feel invisible. Invisible, Victoria repeated thoughtfully. That's an interesting word choice. I'm blind, but I've never felt invisibly. Not exactly. More like defined by what I can't do rather than what I can. She paused. But right now, dancing with you, I just feel like someone at a party. Someone normal. It's nice. You're not normal, Thomas said, then quickly added, I mean that as a compliment. You're extraordinary. The courage it takes to come to an event like this alone, to stand tall when you could easily stay home. That's not normal. That's exceptional. Victoria's eyes glistened slightly. Thank you. My father worries about me constantly. He tries to protect me from everything, which I understand, but sometimes. She trailed off. Sometimes protection can become a prison, Thomas finished gently. Yes, she breathed. Exactly that. They danced in comfortable silence for a moment, moving in perfect synchronization now. Thomas was aware of the other guests watching them, some with curiosity, some with disapproval. He didn't care. May I ask you something? Victoria said. Your voice here, there's something in it. A kind of sadness, but also wisdom. Have you known loss? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he finally said. I've known loss. I lost myself for a while, actually. Made mistakes, hurt people I loved, fell very far from where I started. But I learned something in the falling. What did you learn? That who we are isn't determined by where we start or how far we fall. It's determined by whether we get back up, by whether we choose kindness even when we're struggling, by whether we can still see the humanity in others when we've lost sight of it in ourselves. Victoria squeezed his hand. That's beautiful. And brave. Getting back up is always brave. The music was ending. Thomas felt a pang of regret. This moment of grace was almost over. He guided Victoria through a final turn, bringing them to a gentle stop exactly where they'd started. Thank you, Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. I can't remember the last time I felt so seen. Which is ironic, I suppose. The pleasure was entirely mine, Thomas said softly. He lifted her hand and kissed it gently, a gesture from another time. You should dance more often, Victoria. The world needs to see your light. He was about to step away when a commotion rose near the ballroom entrance. The crowd parted, and a man in an expensive tuxedo strode through. Robert Sterling, one of the wealthiest men in the city, philanthropist, CEO, Victoria's father. His face was dark with anger as he approached them. Victoria. What are you doing? Who is this man? Before Victoria could answer, Sterling's eyes locked on Thomas. The color drained from his face. He stopped mid-stride, his mouth opening in shock. Thomas? He whispered. Thomas Whitmore. The ballroom fell silent. Every eye turned toward them. Victoria's hand tightened on Thomas's arm, confused by the sudden tension. Hello, Robert, Thomas said quietly. His voice was steady, but his heart was racing. It's been a long time. Sterling stared at him, emotions warring across his face. Here, shock, confusion, and something else. Something that looked almost like guilt. I don't understand, Victoria said, her voice uncertain. You two know each other? Thomas took a deep breath. This was another moment he'd been running from for 12 years, the truth he'd buried beneath humility and hard work and self-imposed exile. Your father and I were business partners, Thomas said softly. 20 years ago. We built Sterling Enterprises together, from the ground up. I was the chief financial officer. We were like brothers. The crowd murmured. Sterling's face had gone pale. What happened? Victoria asked, her voice barely audible. I made a mistake, Thomas said, his voice clear and honest. A terrible mistake. I diverted company funds for a real estate investment that I thought would pay off. I did it without Robert's knowledge, without board approval. I was arrogant, reckless. The investment failed. I lost millions of dollars that weren't mine to risk. He paused, steadying himself. This was the part that still hurt. Even after all these years, I went to prison for 3 years. Lost everything, my reputation, my career, my marriage. When I got out, Robert had bought me out of the company, paid back every penny I'd stolen, and moved on. I don't blame him. I destroyed his trust, put everything we'd built at risk. But why are you here? Victoria asked. Why are you working as she stopped, understanding dawning on her face. As a janitor, Thomas finished gently. Because when I got out of prison, no one would hire me. My degree didn't matter. My experience didn't matter. I was a convicted felon. The only person who gave me a chance was the manager here at the hotel. He knew my story and hired me anyway. I've been working here ever since, trying to rebuild my life, trying to be the man I should have been all along. Sterling had been standing frozen throughout this confession. Now he moved forward slowly, his expression unreadable. You never told me, he said hoarsely. You never told me you were working here. Would it have mattered? Thomas asked quietly. You'd moved on. You'd built an empire. I didn't want to drag you back into my mistakes. Dad, Victoria's voice was small, confused. Why didn't you tell me about any of this? Sterling turned to his daughter, and Thomas saw something break in his face. Because I was ashamed, he whispered. Not of Thomas or of myself. He went to prison, yes. He made a terrible mistake. But I abandoned him. He had a daughter, Emma, who was only 12 years old. He had a family that needed support. And I turned my back completely. I didn't visit him in prison, didn't help his family, didn't even take his calls when he got out. The ballroom was utterly silent now. Thomas could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of 12 years of secrets settling around them like dust. I told myself I was protecting the company, Sterling continued, his voice cracking. Protecting my family. But the truth is, I was protecting my pride. Thomas had hurt me, betrayed me, and I punished him for it. Not just fairly, but completely. I erased him from my life like he'd never existed. Tears were streaming down Victoria's face now. Dad. Sterling walked closer to Thomas, close enough that Thomas could see the tears in his eyes too. I've thought about you every single day for 12 years, he said. Wondered where you were, how you were surviving. I told myself you'd probably left the city, started over somewhere else. But you were here all along, cleaning the floors of my hotel, and I never even knew. I didn't want you to know, Thomas said softly. I didn't want your pity, Robert. I wanted to earn my way back, one clean floor at a time. I wanted to prove here, maybe just to myself, that I could still be a good man, even after everything. And you are, Sterling said, his voice breaking. You are a good man. You always were. You made one mistake, one terrible mistake, but you've paid for it 1,000 times over. And he took a shuddering breath. I compounded your punishment with my own cruelty. I'm so sorry, Thomas. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry. He did something then that shocked everyone in the ballroom, including Thomas. Robert Sterling, Billionaire CEO, dropped to his knees in front of the hotel janitor and bowed his head. Please, he whispered. Please forgive me. Thomas stood frozen, his own tears falling now. Around them, the ballroom held its collective breath. This was not how these stories were supposed to go. The powerful did not kneel before the humble. The successful did not apologize to the fallen. But Thomas had learned something in his years of quiet redemption. He'd learned that mercy was stronger than judgment, that forgiveness was braver than bitterness, that grace could exist even in the most unexpected moments. He reached down and took Sterling's hands, helping him to his feet. There's nothing to forgive, Robert. You gave me the gift of having to rebuild myself. You gave me the chance to discover who I really was beneath the success and the pride. I'm grateful for that, even though it was painful. Sterling pulled Thomas into a fierce embrace, both men crying openly now. The ballroom erupted in applause, but Thomas barely heard it. He was somewhere else, somewhere beyond vindication or triumph, in a place where two old friends found their way back to each other across a chasm of pain and time. Victoria was crying too, her hands pressed to her face. Thomas gently extracted himself from Sterling's embrace and turned to her. Thank you for the dance, he said softly. You gave me something I didn't know I needed, a reminder that kindness still exists in this world, that connection still matters. You did the same for me, Victoria whispered. She reached out, finding his hand and squeezing it tight. Promise me something? Anything. Promise me you'll dance with me again. Not as a janitor, not as my father's old partner, but as my friend. As Thomas. I promise, he said. The quartet started playing again, and Sterling cleared his throat. There's something I need to do, he announced to the crowd. Something I should have done 12 years ago. He turned to Thomas, his voice carrying across the ballroom. Thomas Whitmore is not just a janitor at this hotel. He's the man who helped me build Sterling Enterprises from nothing. He made a mistake, and he paid for it with humility and grace. I should have stood by him. I didn't. But I'm standing by him now. He paused, looking directly at Thomas. I'd like to offer you a position at Sterling Enterprises. Not out of pity, not out of guilt, but because you're brilliant, because you've proven your character in ways that matter more than any resume, and because I need someone I can trust. Someone who understands that success without integrity is meaningless. The crowd erupted again. Thomas stood there, overwhelmed, his mind reeling. This wasn't what he'd expected. This wasn't what he'd been seeking. Robert, he said quietly, I appreciate that more than you know. But I need to think about it. I have a life here, a daughter who's proud of me for who I am now, not who I used to be. I've learned to find dignity in honest work, and I don't want to lose that lesson. Sterling nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. You're right. Of course you're right. Take all the time you need. The offer stands. Whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready. The evening continued, but everything had changed. Thomas danced with Victoria twice more, this time with her father's blessing. He met other guests who wanted to shake his hand, to hear his story, to understand how a man could fall so far and still maintain his grace. Emma arrived near the end of the gala, having heard the news from a coworker. She found her father in the service corridor, taking a quiet moment alone. Dad, she said softly, everyone's talking about what happened, about who you used to be. Thomas turned to her, worried about what he'd see in her eyes. But there was only love, only pride. You were always my hero, Emma said, tears streaming down her face. When I was 12 and you went to prison, I didn't understand. When you came home and took the janitor job, I was embarrassed at first. I wanted you to be someone important again. But you taught me something more valuable than importance. You taught me dignity. You taught me that redemption is possible, that mistakes don't define us, that real strength is getting up every morning and doing honest work even when the world has counted you out. She hugged him fiercely. I'm so proud of you, Dad. Not because a billionaire apologized to you tonight, but because you were kind to a lonely woman at a dance. Because that's who you are now, as someone who sees other people's pain and tries to ease it. That's better than anything you ever were before. Thomas held his daughter close, his heart too full for words. She was right. He'd lost an empire but found himself. He'd traded wealth for wisdom, success for integrity, power for peace. That night, as Thomas cleaned the ballroom after the gala, indeed because that was still his job, still his responsibility, he moved with a lightness he hadn't felt in years. The floors gleamed under his mop, reflecting the soft light of the chandeliers above. He thought about the dance, about Victoria's trust, about Sterling's tears, about the unexpected grace of forgiveness given and received. He thought about how far he'd fallen and how, in the falling, he'd discovered what it meant to truly rise. The ballroom was empty now, silent except for the soft swish of his mop. But Thomas didn't feel alone. He felt surrounded by something larger than himself, by the possibility of redemption, by the power of second chances, by the simple, profound truth that kindness matters more than status, that character matters more than career, that who we choose to be in our darkest moments defines us far more than who we were in our brightest ones. He danced with a CEO's daughter, yes. But more importantly, he danced as himself, not the man he used to be, not the man he might become, but the man he was right now. And that man, Thomas realized, was finally someone he could be proud of. The last dance hadn't been an ending after all. It had been a beginning of four.